Hello, fellow fantasy sports fans. Welcome to MFSN The Hub's Fantasy Baseball Draft Preview Show. I almost said waiver wire. We're not there yet. We haven't started the season. Every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, I'm here as always with Kasey, Vlad to the Bone, Shienvold, and Ross the Boss.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ross the Boss. And I want to talk I was going to say waiver wire again. You got me on that waiver wire thing. I want to talk fantasy baseball, catchers in first base with you, cowboy.
That's right. We are beginning our draft preview. Listen, it's already mid-February, and everybody's like, baseball, really? And it's like, no. The draft is really, a lot of people are going to start drafting in about a month. You got to start figuring out who are your guys. And we're going to be going through basically position by position. There's 2 days where we're going to have two positions. Today is one of those, with catcher and first base today. So what we want to hear from you guys, and that's true whether you're watching live right now or whether you're watching later, we want your comments. It's fun to debate this, and it's also helpful because you go through and it gets you thinking. It happens all the time. I say something, Ross or Kasey says another thing. I'm like, oh, I was not thinking of it that way. This is why you need time in the lead up towards the draft, because we're all going to be thinking about certain things wrong. And then you're going to show up to the draft and guess what? We're still thinking about things wrong. We're going to find out what we did wrong as the season goes, but you're going to get a lot of things right also if you're thinking about it. So let's dive in with catchers. Now we're going to do top 10 lists, but we're also going to do sleepers, busts, and value picks. So I think before we even get into the top 10 list, I want to talk about sleepers, busts, and value picks. I think it's more fun to do it that way. Kasey, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
I want you to give me, you can pick sleeper, bust, or value pick. Go ahead. Tell me who you want to
And we're
talk
doing
about.
catchers?
For catchers.
Okay. I'll start with a sleeper. Everybody's going to talk about Dalton Varsho going to Toronto and the value he brings because he doesn't really play catcher, but he still qualifies as catcher. And absolutely, he's probably a top 4 or 5 player on most lists. But I'm going to go for the guy that was traded for him, and that's Gabriel Moreno, who went to Arizona from Toronto. Remember, Gabriel Moreno was their top prospect all season long, came up and actually hit pretty well. The problem was they had Alejandro Kirk, who was the breakout of catchers last year. Moreno is very similar to Alejandro Kirk, and now he's going to another hitter-friendly environment in Arizona, which some argue is the best hitting environment in baseball. So that's somebody who not a lot of people are thinking of. The Arizona Diamondbacks tend to be a bit of an afterthought when it comes to fantasy baseball for the most part. And you can get him late, and he can probably provide top 7 or 8 value at the position.
Nice. Okay, now Ross, weigh in on that. What do you think about Kasey's pick? Because he's saying top 7 catcher value. I'm looking at my top 7. I don't have him in my top 7, but I can understand.
No, I mean, I think Kasey is totally wrong on this occasion. I don't see him as a top 10 fantasy catcher with the way leagues are stat wise. He's
Ross,
a very average catcher, average arm on defense, and very in the power with him is not that strong. I don't know where I'm looking at his minor league stats, and his power is really not there.
A 310 hitter in his minor league career.
I'm not saying his average. I'm just saying power.
Okay,
and,
but
when we talk about catchers, you got to worry about there's power. There's a lot of good hitting catchers this year.
Okay, it's true, but there are many ways to play catcher, and I think that I mean in fantasy leagues, of course, there's many ways to play catcher in real life. But if you play a guy who's not going to hurt you in average, you're just picking up stats, and you're not hurting yourself anywhere. So
not hurting yourself, but you're not helping yourself either. But again, I mean, if Kasey likes this guy and he wants to draft this guy,
if he ends up hitting
go ahead.
Power,
I'm not taking him because I know like 10 other guys. I'll give you a value pick right now. That last year he played for the Texas Rangers, and you kept on calling him Jonah Hill. His name is Jonah Heim, and Jonah Heim is a good hitter and a good fielder, but his hitting, and the Texas Rangers have some hitters this year, and they're a team to be reckoned with because they got McGroom as their pitcher. They got some great talent on that team. I love Garcia in the outfield. He's a guy that's going to have 30 stolen bases and 30 home runs. I think he can do it this year. So all around, I feel Heim is a guy that you should at least consider as a value pick in the draft.
Now, where do you see him in the rankings overall? I mean,
7 or 8.
Interesting. So again, I don't have him in my top 10.
That's fine. I mean, you got to take chances sometimes. There's guys that are going to outperform. And
listen,
guys that
I think he's a perfect guy to take maybe as your second catcher because nobody's thinking about him. And if you hit on it
in a 10-person league, yes. In a 10-person league, in a 16 or 20-person league, no.
Well, yes,
but he'll be your starting catcher.
Probably not now.
But I mean, those, both those are very good value picks, Dan. So who's your value pick, Mr.
Okay, well, you said a value pick. Casey said a sleeper, so I'm going to say a bust.
All right.
Okay.
A lot of people are. I'm not saying. Listen, we got to remember what a bust is. It means like the level of investment is not going to match what you're getting, and I just don't think he's going to have that great a season.
I mean, let me ask you a question about bust, real quick for the group.
Go ahead.
So if a player is projected to hit 25 home runs and he hits 22 home runs, is that a bust?
No.
So like a bust would be last year Ronald Acuna, right? People drafted him in the first round and got maybe 7th round value out of him. He still had a decent year. Don't get me wrong. He was still, I think, a top 30 outfielder. But if you're drafting a guy as a number 1 and he comes in 20 spots lower, that's a bust.
I understand.
Okay, so that's one of the ways that they can be a bust. Another way they can be a bust is, let's say you draft them and they just are basically unplayable because they're hitting 197. Like
Gary Sanchez.
Exactly. So my busted catcher is MJ Melendez. Now,
bust. You're bust.
He's a bust.
Not your okay.
Now, the reason I say he's a bust is I think he's a sleeper for a lot of people. I think he's a highly valued player for a lot of people. He qualifies at outfield also. So you'd think that this is going to be really good. The problem is, first of all, the 217 average and his plate discipline. I could see him playing his way out of getting to play. And that's where you can bust with a guy like Melendez. And of course, we're looking for things that are out of whack with everybody else when we're looking for busts and sleepers and value picks. So there's plenty of catchers who are going to bust, but the reason I have him down is I think he has a lot of value, and I really don't expect him to perform better than a lot of these guys. I'd rather have Heim than Melendez, honestly. So questionable. Let's get into our actual top 10. Let's do just top 5. We're gonna do top 5. Ross, I'm gonna start with you. Give me your top 5, and then Casey, let's respond to this.
Okay.
So number 1, I'm taking somebody that can hit 40 home runs. I mean, he's the only catcher I have that can hit 40 home runs.
Well, there's only one of them.
The only one is Salvador Perez of Kansas City. If he stays healthy, he got hurt last year. Kansas City is a team that really improved during the offseason. They have some really young hitters too, and that lineup with Perez in it, he's going to be right in the middle of it. He'll be feasting with RBIs and runs this year. He's going to have a really good year if he stays healthy. But I think he'll be DHing a lot too, and he'll be playing catcher. But he's my number 1, JT Realmuto. I love him. I think he's the best. Realmuto. He's the best National League catcher.
Gelato.
I mean, and he's a guy that's kind of 25 home runs and 80 RBIs. I mean, you just put him down for that right now. So if you want a catcher who's going to do that, that's great. Somebody who I'm in LA. I don't like the Dodgers, but I do turn on Dodger games. Somebody that's always gets a hit when they need it is Will Smith. And Will Smith is just clutch. And he's just there, and he's in the lineup. He plays like 90% of the time, and he can hit. And I like the guy. And then somebody I'm going to say somebody, and you guys are going to say, "Oh, you're just saying that because you're a Reds fan." Blah, blah, blah. Tyler Stevenson got hurt last year. He was having a good season. He's a naturally great hitter. He'll be taking Votto's spot at first base eventually, probably starting this year, I imagine. But he does qualify for catcher, Kasey Shienvold. So Tyler Stevenson, who I love his bat. His defense is average. I'm not, but doesn't matter. But he'll be playing a lot of first base this year. I see Votto kind of not playing as much as he did last year. But Tyler Stevenson is somebody I have on my charts pretty high this season. I think he's going to have a great season in that joke ballpark where the Reds play at, Great American Ballpark. So those are some of the players I like. I like the obvious ones too, but who do you guys like?
All right. Well, first of all, I give you full credit. I know you're not saying this as a Reds fan. If anything, you're probably jaded the other way about it. But the fact that he whenever a catcher qualifies at another position, this is part of the strategy of the game. And that's actually why MJ Melendez is interesting, because he qualifies at outfield. It's a question of whether he's going to get the playing time. Tyler Stevenson looks like he is. Kasey, what do you think about? Actually, let me say one thing first. Last show, I said we were debating Real Muto versus Salvador Perez, and I sided with Ross on Salvador Perez. However, I looked at the statistics from last year, and I was like, Jesus, I did not realize Real Muto did that well. I mean,
he did, but remember Perez was hurt. Look at Perez's year before.
I know that, but
sure,
whether he's
look
hurt
at his
or
year
not,
before, but
he was hurt, guys. He was hurt.
I hear you, but whether
he's also a 33-year-old, 255-pound catcher.
I also think, sometimes people can get a power stroke and it can be for the whole year. He only did it 1 year. He is my number 2 catcher, but the reason Real Muto is number 1 is the stolen bases.
A 2020 catcher.
A 2020 catcher, I think, is more valuable than even taking a chance on a 40 homer, guys. Especially if you're playing in keeper league and you have Aaron Judge. You don't need to take a chance on Salvador Perez if you have a chance to get Real Muto. However, I'm probably not going to end up with either one of them because they get drafted too early.
Or they're keepers.
Or they're kept.
Yeah.
Salvador Perez won't be kept this year because he had a down year. Real Muto probably will. So, Case, let's jump in with your catcher top 10. I have Real Muto number 1. I want to hear you.
I have Real Muto number 1 as well. In fact, I have Salvador Perez all the way down at number 5, which might be a bit of a shock to people, but I have him in my bust column. I just he's turning 33. He got hurt last year. A couple years before that, he got hurt as well. I just think catchers, their bodies break down, and he's huge, like 6'3", 255. I mean, that's just a big man. So could he hit you 30 home runs or more? Absolutely. He's proven he can do it, but he's just as likely to play 57 games and bat 238. And you're going to be using a top 5 rounds pick maybe to get him if you want him. And that's not worth it to me. So I have Real Muto 1. I actually have Will Smith number 2. So I agree with Ross with Smith and Real Muto being up very high. I have him a little higher. And the number 3, I have Adley Rutschman. I just think he's the next one to kind of, take the mantle of the it factor when it comes to a catcher. He could have a, not quite as much power as Piazza, but kind of that Piazza type of impact on the game offensively. He can do it all. He's young. He's athletic. He can run a little bit, not like Real Muto, obviously. Not many catchers can. But he's a left-handed bat in Camden Yards. And I know they pushed the fences back in left field, but not in right field. And they weren't going to do that because they had Adley Rutschman coming up. I just think he's going to play what, 10, how many games? 81 games in Camden Yards, another 10 in Yankee Stadium, another 10 in Rogers Center. Like it's just set up for him to be a dynamic offensive talent. And I think Baltimore is one of those up and coming teams, and he's part of the reason why. So I had him at number 3. Number 4, I had Dalton Varsho. He's not going to catch in Toronto, but he still qualifies as a catcher. Here's a guy who 27 home runs, stole 16 bases, and qualifies as a catcher. And he's going to another hitter-friendly environment. I would have ranked him higher, but some players, a lot of people tend to struggle when they switch from one league to the other for the first at least half of the year, if not entire year. So that held him back a little bit for me, but talent-wise, I have him at 4. And then I put Perez at 5 only because him for half a season is probably better than anybody from 6 through 10. But I still worry about the injuries.
Okay, so I have Real Muto number 1. I have Salvador Perez 2 just because the upside is so ridiculous. So I'm willing. I'm not going to get him though because you got to draft him at a spot that's probably too high for what I want. I do have Will Smith 3. I have Dalton Varsho 4. The Toronto Blue Jays have 3 viable catchers on their team,
and they traded one.
It's hilarious. Who did they trade? What's that?
Gabriel
Moreno. Right.
Yeah.
They had to. You can't have 4. I mean, I suppose you could. I have Adley Rutschman as my 5 also. Varsho is interesting because in the old days, we would look at his batting average and be like 237 or whatever it was and be like, that's a terrible batting average. Now that's not that bad. I think it's actually almost average. And he can steal bases, and he's in a very potent lineup. So I do have him 4. I have Adley Rutschman 5 because I think he's the one of the people on the back end of this who can put up the upsides. All right, so let's talk about back end guys.
Let's talk back end. I'll name a player. You tell me where you guys have him ranked. Are you ready?
Let's do it. Perfect.
Sean Murphy, Atlanta catcher, came from the A's.
10th.
What do you guys think?
I have him 12th.
I have him at 10.
Alejandro Kirk.
I have him at 6.
I have him at 6 also.
I have him at 10. We can talk about
Wilson Contreras. He is actually on a new
St.
team
Louis.
right now.
Yeah.
And what do you guys think he'll do this year?
I have the Contreras brothers 7 and 8.
And I have them 6 and 7.
And Molina retired, correct? So that's why
that's
Contreras
right.
is a St. Louis. Okay.
But the Cardinals always do great things.
Somebody somebody that last year we talked about this guy during waiver wire. I brought his name up a lot. And Kasey, you remember Cal Raleigh of the Seattle Mariners. I mean, he actually had some good weeks where he was like on fire.
Yeah.
Where do you guys have Cal this year on your charts?
I have him 11.
I have him 13, but I also have him as a value pick.
I have a value. I was going to say that. I think value pick in even a sleeper pick, you can name him too. Somebody that's going to
kind of go either way with him, you know.
Yeah, I and then Jonah Heim. Where do you guys have him?
I have him 14.
I have him 9th.
I agree with. And then somebody I think is a huge bust. I mean, he now he's on another team, and has not been hitting at all the past few years. Is Christian Vasquez of the Minnesota Twins. What do you guys have Christian at?
I actually don't dislike him. He didn't hit for power, but he was like a 270 or 275 hitter last year.
I'm just talking about RBIs and home runs.
I have him. I only ranked my top 15. I don't have him in there. So
I don't either. Okay, so we stayed away from Christian. I was going to say he's a bust, but I had him on my list, and I just want to hear what you guys had to say about that. And then where do you guys have my top 5, but you guys didn't talk about him at all? Tyler Stevenson.
I have him at 12 or 13.
I have
13.
him at 11.
Good.
But okay. You know, keep in mind that's a pretty respectable. Like catcher's not that shallow this year. There's some decent options.
I mean, I agree. And we always say the catchers are the tight ends position of baseball. You know what I mean? There's like 1 or 2 great ones, and then there's a big drop off, you know, and I just feel the catcher position this year, I think we'll see a lot of improvement compared to last year. I mean,
and just to put a little bit of respect on the catchers, they may be the tight end of fantasy baseball, but they're much better than tight end. I mean, tight end, you can play somebody and they just get 7 yards or 0. So I do think Wilson Contreras is going to have a pretty big year. I have him at number 6. The Cardinals just always know what they're doing. William Contreras I have next. The guy that I have that no one – actually, I have 2 guys that no one's mentioned so far. But the guy that I really like is Danny Jansen. Danny Jansen is my sleeper pick.
I just worry about playing time.
I am too. I like his stats.
I love his upside.
Doesn't play every day.
But I'll tell you why he's going to be in there a lot. The pitching staff loves the guy. So I think that's the reason he's going to be in there. I have him at number 8. And that was an aggressive ranking. I know that.
Oh, it's not that aggressive. When you consider in 215 plate appearances and 500 is probably average for a catcher. You know,
15 homers.
Yeah, he had 15 home runs. Sean Murphy had 537 at bats and only had 18 home runs.
Right. So I like the upside there.
Sure.
The other guy that I have in the mix that no one's really talked about is Travis Darnot, unless there's some kind of injury that I don't know about that I need to investigate.
No, he's in camp. He's good.
And I know Murphy's there too, but he's going to get his playing time, and he's to get a catcher of that caliber late. He's a great value pick.
Yeah, but the last name of Murphy playing in Atlanta, just think about it. There's so much pressure on him.
The guy I have that we haven't talked about yet,
Bob Horner. No, I'm kidding.
Right, is Pop Warner. No, I have Francisco Alvarez of the Mets. I mean, if you're looking for a guy who has the power to like be the next Salvador Perez type of hitter, I mean, he's probably never going to hit more than 260 or 270. But the Mets don't have much in his way. Let's see who they have in his way. They have, Omar Narvaez, who was decent for half a season a couple of years ago, and Tomas Nido are the other 2 catchers there. I mean, think about that lineup to be able to bat in when you have, you know, Pete Alonso and Starling Marte and Francisco Lindor. Sorry, I was about to say Alvarez. I was saying the same.
Well, let me ask you guys a question here, though. Just from a strategy standpoint, if you don't take one of the top catchers, do you take 2 of them to hedge your bets and see which one emerges, or do you just take one and take your lumps?
It depends on how the draft is going, obviously, because I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest, unless I get one of the top 5 or top 4, usually I'm waiver wiring catchers on and off for the early part of the season until I find one that sticks. So what I would likely be able to do or want to do is get a Francisco Alvarez or somebody like that late in the draft who I can store on my bench in case he makes it or in case he does it. And then I'll take the hot hand off the waiver wire early in the season.
Ross, how about you?
Depends how big the league is. If it's a 10-person league, yes, you can wait. I mean, definitely you can wait. If it's a 16, 20-person league, I wouldn't be waiting that long. And yes, I probably would take a backup catcher pretty quickly also. But 10-person league, you can wait to your very last pick to take a catcher.
Okay,
if
but what about
waited,
12?
I have a problem having 2 catchers.
Yeah.
It feels like such a painful waste of a bench spot.
Yeah.
It is, but I've been in leagues where you have 2 catchers starting. Ever been in that league?
I've been in a 2-catcher league.
Yeah, I've been in a 2-catcher league. It's very frustrating sometimes because you're taking a catcher that doesn't play every day.
Yeah.
So Dan, you're in Cleveland. I know you're in touch with the Guardians, on a regular basis. What are your thoughts on not the younger brother, Bo Naylor?
Oh, Naylor. Yeah, I mean he's a potential breakout candidate. He's similar to Francisco Alvarez. You could pick him up as one of these rookies who could really break out. I'll tell you the reason I actually don't like him that much. It's hard to say as a Cleveland fan, but I just don't think the lineup is potent enough. And so I like him for the future, but I think not the guy for this year. Anybody else you want to mention?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else you guys want to mention before we move on to first base?
The only guy I have on my list that we haven't said is Logan O'Hoppe in the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. That's hard to say. He was part of the trade that brought Brandon Marsh to Philadelphia. A good hitter with a good track record in the minors. I'm not saying you waste a draft pick on him, especially not a high to mid draft pick.
Maybe just have him on your watch list.
Have him on your watch list, especially through the first part of the season, because they're saying he's going to be the everyday catcher. And if he does what he does in the minors, is he going to win you the league? No, but he's not going to lose you the league. And that's something to be said for a catcher.
Do you guys know the Angels announced today before like the first preseason game that their starting opening pitcher for opening day is Ohtani?
Did they even have to announce it?
It was like I was on the wire. I was watching MLB. It was on the bottom scroll, and it's like the Angels announced their starting pitcher for opening day is Ohtani. It's like
in his last season in Los Angeles.
I mean, it's like why would you announce it like even before camp even really opens?
It's also like announcing that water is wet. I mean,
right?
I guess, but
Aaron Judge is going to start in right
also.
field.
It's just a weird announcement.
It's both obvious and too early at the same time. It's really weird.
It's like, well, why would you? It's that slow of a press day. You got to say something, Mr. Press Guy.
I guess they just wanted to make a splash. All right, guys, let's move to first base. And here, my first question to you is this: how many first basemen do you think could be argued is the number 1 first baseman? Don't even give me names yet. Just how many? 3 for Kasey.
I would say 2.
I think there's 3 that you can argue, and actually there's a 4th.
3.5. Yeah, there's 3.5.
I'm gonna go. You know what? I'll say 4. I think there are 4 that you can really argue.
4.
I could argue him also. I'm assuming we're talking about the same person, and I could argue him as the number 1. His
is it John Kruk? No, I'm kidding.
Little Johnny One Nut.
Ross. I'm gonna let you start. Give me. You said there were 2, right?
I think there's 2 that I have.
Who are they?
There's 2 that I would say that are one. You can flip flop them, and it doesn't make a difference. Freddie Freeman for the Dodgers is just so consistent every year. This guy's a monster. I mean, I don't like the Dodgers, but this guy is just a machine. Home runs, RBIs, runs scored. He does it. He does everything. And he's a likable guy too. He's good to the community. He's a good guy. He's a family guy. Everything about him is great. Freddie Freeman. And then somebody that I know he's a year older, and people say, oh, he's a year older now. I don't know if he'll do the same thing he did last year, is Paul Goldschmidt. I mean, you can't argue the year he had, Kasey. You can't say
not at all
that this guy is not a top tier first baseman. You can't say it. So those are my top 2. I know Alonso. I know your middle name, Vlad to the bone. I know there's other guys, But those are the two guys that I like above the other guys. But that's me. But I'm still taking Goldschmidt. I'll still ride that train again. He was money last year, and I'll do it again. Who do you guys like? Tell me your top 5.
Okay,
Well,
Case. Well, we're not
top-
going to top 5. We're just going to do now. We're going to top 3 for Kasey.
Okay, it's fine. Top 3.
Well, I said 3.5, but I have Vlad number 1.
Of course you do.
soft
But
on
no
the guy,
surprise on this show.
But also, hey, look, he had a bad year last year.
Okay, you admit it. You admit that's the first thing.
275 with 32 home runs, 90 runs scored, and 97 RBIs with 8 stolen bases, and that's a bad year.
At least you admit it. The first thing, being a clinical psychologist like I am, is you got to admit your faults, and that's the first thing you did. And thank you for that. Yes.
Number 2, I have Freddie Freeman.
Okay, obvious. Okay, good.
21 home runs, 13 stolen bases. Like, he actually chips in and running, and he scores over 100 runs. Now, that offense is not going to be as prolific, I don't think, this year as it was last year, but he's still automatic for numbers. I actually have number 3. I have Pete Alonso, just because of the home runs. I mean, he could easily hit 40 home runs. 50 home runs. He drove in 131 runs last year. Like,
I know.
that's insane. And still batted 271. Like, he's not putting up terrible numbers. And then Paul, and I agree with you, the fourth one, and all of them you can make a case for number 1, is Paul Goldschmidt. I mean, the guy is getting up there. He's a little long in the tooth. He's in his mid to late 30s. So mid 30s,
Kasey, get it right. He's not late 30s.
Mid to late, I said. 35 home runs, 317 average, 100 runs scored, 100 RBIs. Yeah, you can't argue with any of those 4 as the number 1. I think the drop off after that is drastic, by the way.
Massive.
It's not a very deep position.
This is what I was saying last week.
It is deep. I'll tell you why. Keep going.
No, listen, it's deep in one way and it's shallow in another. And this is what Kasey's bringing up. Like, I agreed with you last week, Ross, that I overshot the statement that first base was shallow. It's not a shallow position overall, but it has a huge drop off.
It's so top heavy. Tier 1 is the strongest first tier maybe of any position.
Okay, go to Olsen now. Let me
then
look
it goes
at
right
Olsen's
to
stats
tier
from last
3.
year.
I agree. I think it goes from tier 1 like all the way to tier 3. Matt Olson is top of tier 3, but he really is.
He's a 240 hitter with, and 100 RBIs is great. 170 strikeouts, 86 runs scored. And by the way, in a points league, because we're not just talking rotisserie, you lose a point for every strikeout. So, like, that hurts you there. 86 runs scored is not a tremendous amount of runs scored. Like, the drop off from Goldschmidt or Alonso, whoever you're putting in that bottom of the first tier, to Matt Olson is
and listen, if you wanted to argue that Matt Olson is tier 2, I can accept that, but he's alone there then. Like, there's no one else that's solid enough.
And then you got Abreu, who's joining a new team. He's on the Astros now. Congratulations, Houston Astros, getting him that first base. I mean, what kind of year is he going to have at first base? You don't think he's going to have a good year with that?
No,
lineup?
I don't think it's going to be a bad year. But last year he only batted 300 with 15 home runs. Like, that's nothing. That's not what a corner infielder is supposed to get you in fantasy sports, like in fantasy baseball.
All right, I'm gonna make a counter argument. I think Jose Abreu is going to be a monster.
Oh, I hope he is.
He's going to be great.
I think so too. I don't think he'll be between. He's going to be right between Alvarez and then Tucker in that lineup.
I think Houston's going to make the difference, taking a lot of heat. And Chicago just had a really bad year last year.
Everybody was hurt.
There was bad stuff going on. I actually have Abreu as my number 5. I have him above Matt Olson. Now,
it's not a bad pick.
So do I.
Interesting. Okay, so let me back up though. Freddie Freeman is my number 1, and he also stole 13 bases. He does everything, like Ross said.
He's just a good human being.
Way,
good guy to have on your
Vladimir stole 8.
Yeah, no. Well, this is one of the reasons I have him second. Those two guys can do everything, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He could easily.
Again, let me just emphasize.
Yeah, we're arguing semantics. We all agree.
Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who's under 25 years old, is still a stud. I mean, trust me.
No,
I have him on my team.
Those are my top 2. I have Pete Alonso next. The home run power is, and to put Paul Goldschmidt 4th here was hard to do after the season he had, but he has had some down years and he's older, so he just has a little more risk to him. Do I worry about him putting up great numbers? No, I do not. And he's going to do it again. I don't know to that tune. I think Jose Abreu is not as far behind Goldschmidt as people may think. You can take advantage of a down year. So Jose Abreu is the kind of guy that I could say is a value pick here. What were you going to say, Case?
No, I don't disagree with you that Abreu can be the first baseman on a championship fantasy team, but you have to know where to draft him then and where the value is the right point to draft him. Like you draft Freeman, Alonso, Vlad, or Goldschmidt in the first 2 rounds of the draft. Like you really have to if you want him. You're not going to take Abreu till probably 2 rounds after that.
Maybe even longer.
More.
The great thing about
Abreu,
so if
you can get him at 6th or 7th round, then I think it's a great pick.
I think you can, and I think it is a fantastic pick. I mean, if I had to circle one pick in first base, that would be it to me because his value.
I disagree, but keep going.
You mean there's somebody that you?
I think there's a lot more better value picks than Abreu, but
there are better value picks than Abreu. But I'm just saying, if I had to target a first baseman that fits into my draft plan, it could be Abreu because he carries value, and I think he's going to do really well. All right, let's shift gears for a sec. Let's talk about busts. Who do you think is going to be a bust? I can't wait to talk about this because Ross is going to go insane. Can't wait.
Well, I'm not going to say Joey Votto is
you'd have to think a lot of them to make him a bust.
But busts. You want my opinion on busts? There's so many great hitters. I mean, if I had to pick a bust as somebody that's going to draft high and not produce, and people who have high expectations of him, I would say Anthony Rizzo is going to have a down year this year. Not because he's bad, not because he'll have an average year, but all these expectations of having 30 home runs and 100 RBIs are not going to happen for him this year. So Anthony Rizzo to me is the bust, but I want to hear like, oh, he has 20 home runs.
I actually ironically have him listed as a value pick because I don't think he might be somebody who gets drafted at the very end as somebody's throw-in pick in round 15.
I thought like round 10 or 11.
No, I don't think he's.
I don't think
so.
The
top 15 or 16 first baseman.
Wow.
So, I think, but you can legitimately get 30 home runs in Yankee Stadium.
I'm not disagreeing. I mean, but I just said
for me, he's a value. Yeah. For me, the bust is somebody who was a bit of a breakout last year, and that's Nate Lowe in Texas. I think he batted 300, he hit 27 home runs. But it only came with 76 RBIs and 74 runs scored. And, it wasn't because of a drastic change in any of his underlying metrics, whether he barreled the ball better, whether he had a higher exit velocity, whether he had a better line drive rate. I mean, some of it was a little bit better, but none of it was substantially better than the year before when he was considered like a post-hype sleeper because he was so bad when he first got called up. He was with Tampa Bay, I think. And so I think people are going to see that and think, wow, there's value in Nate Lowe because he's a 300 hitter with 27 home runs in Texas. And I could easily see him batting 255 with 15 to 20 home runs and just being a disappointment for owners.
I can definitely see that. And this is where it being kind of like a deep position, but after a big drop.
By the way, I have him ranked as number 10 in first baseman. So when I say he's a bust, I still think he's a top 10.
You're talking
about but a bust in a way that people have high expectations.
Okay, so here's my bust. The only reason I said Ross may go crazy about it is you sounded very high on him before. I think CJ Cron is going to be a bust. Now,
Kasey, what were his stats? What was his stats last year? Can you just read it off for Dr. Dan Ratner?
257, 29 home runs, 79 runs scored, 102 RBIs.
Okay. And he plays in Colorado.
Plays in Colorado.
We all know is a joke.
But listen, if his RBIs come down even just a little bit, you're going to end up overpaying for him. I'm not saying he's going to be a bad player. I'm just saying I don't have him in my top 10. Like maybe top 12, maybe.
I have him 9, but that's just because he plays in Colorado. If he didn't play in Colorado, I agree. If he played in anywhere else,
but that's why I'm 11. Yeah, listen, if he didn't play in Colorado, me saying CJ Cron is a bust is not really news to anybody. No, but I think the fact that he plays in Colorado, and I'm still saying I think he's going to bust, it's just not where I would invest in first base.
Okay.
He's never really done it before, and if his RBIs come down, he drops off to basically waiver wire, material. I like the
Waiver
Colorado.
wire material. 100 RBIs and 29 home runs. He's
I'm
waiver
saying-
wire material.
I'm saying if he falls down, if he's
that's true with Mike Trout. Then if he falls down, I mean, he'll be waiver wire material.
I think that's not going to happen. Though I do think Mike Trout is a major injury risk. Unfortunately,
How dare you?
I have him on my. I've had him on my keeper league for years, and
I know
he's
you have.
breaking down. Now
somebody
he's
that
available for
I
trade.
think's going to have a huge breakout year. This guy. There's two guys that I love that are going to be drafted late. The first one is Vinny Pasquantino.
Oh my God, he said it right.
My Italian is perfect. Last year he came up, and we all talked about him during waiver wire because he was huge in the minors, had big seasons. They brought him up, and he needed that half a year to get used to major league pitching. Now he's done it. Now he's going to be there for the Royals, and I think he's going to have a big breakout season. He's one of the guys I'm taking
on my list. Yeah.
You have him number 7, is that what you said?
Yep.
Kasey,
I have
you
him number 7 also.
And I just feel like he's somebody you can take late in the draft. A lot of people don't know about him. And the other guy that I think that is off people's radar that I think is going to have a huge year is Andrew Vaughn of the White Sox.
I have
love
him
this
as a
kid.
sleeper.
I loved him last year.
Sleeper.
I love this guy,
What'd you
Andrew
say?
Vaughn, and you guys, that's why I just feel the first base position is kind of thick, just because of those two guys I just mentioned, and CJ Cron, who you guys mentioned, are two guys that you could probably take later in the draft.
Now, what do you think of Rick Vaughn?
I love Rick, number
Wild
99 of the Cleveland Indians, not the Guardians, the Indians.
The guy who cut his hair with Vegematic or whatever.
Oh yes.
The guy who I think nobody's talking about because of where he plays and who's going to be, I think, what everybody puts. I think he's going to be Matt Olson. Is Rowdy Tellez in Milwaukee.
I want that guy in my. First of all, I want him on my softball team.
He does. He looks like he plays in a beer league. I love that.
I want him on my team.
If you remember back in the 90s, he reminds me a lot of Matt Stairs, who the Milwaukee Brewers had. But I mean, Rowdy Tellez is literally like he's in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
He's going to play every day. He finished tied for 7th in the league last year with 35 home runs, even though he doesn't bat against left-handers and he struggles.
How many stolen bases, Kasey? I forgot.
Oh God, can't be
-2.
The joke. I'm joke. Don't look it up. It's a joke.
I'll look at it. No, now you got me.
He does have one.
He does have one.
There had to be one. Like they didn't. It was. He had 2.
I know it.
He batted .219, so the batting average stunk. 35 home runs and 90 RBIs. But here's an important thing to remember: he was shifted against as much as almost anybody in the league, right? And he hits into the shift pretty regularly because those lefty pull hitters tend to hit ground balls to the shift. The shift is gone. So if 20 more of those ground balls or line drives to the right-hand side land because of it, all of a sudden he's a 250 hitter with 100 RBIs and 35 home runs. And that suddenly is a viable starter. And you can probably get him at the very end of the draft.
I think he's more than a viable starter. That's a very valuable starter, and it's a great point, and it's why you got to stay on your toes in this game. Things shift all the time in a variety of ways. There are going to be people who don't know about Vinny Pasquantino. I mean, we have a keeper league, so we know about him, but a lot of people don't. And this guy is a really talented hitter. I have him at 7 also, Kasey, because everybody below him doesn't have nearly the upside. As far as I'm concerned. I had Andrew Vaughn as a sleeper as well, but I wanted to ask you guys, what do you see in him that makes him a sleeper?
I see a guy who only struck out had a 17% strikeout rate, which is really low. So he's got good bat to ball skills. As evidenced by a 270 batting average. And he was also 82nd percentile in exit velocity and 90th percentile in hard hit rate. Like, he has similar metrics to what Vladimir Guerrero had his first season, when all he had to do was learn how to elevate the ball. And we saw what he did in the second season. I'm not saying this guy is Guerrero anywhere near Guerrero, but it's not out of the question. Somebody who came into the league with all the hype about being a polished hitter with power, that if he can increase his launch angle by 3 or 4 degrees, suddenly you're talking about a 290 hitter with 25 home runs.
And people forget, they forget that certain people were pretty high prospects. I mean, he
Was
didn't
a
just
hitter.
come out of nowhere.
Right.
I mean,
No, I've been tracking him.
The
for
one
past
I'm
couple of
interested
years.
in seeing how he does this year, speaking of post hype, is Spencer Torkelson. If you remember, that guy was like a top
And
3
I
pick of the
forgot,
draft in
Casey.
Detroit,
What college did he go to? I
University of
totally
Arizona.
No. It's right here on my shirt.
Oh,
I
University.
mean, that's the answer to that question.
That's the answer. It's Arizona
He's a
State.
Wildcat.
He's at Sun Devil, and he was drafted number one.
Was it
Casey
by the
Shienvold.
Tigers? Yeah.
And I like him. I like Spencer a lot. I hope he has a big year. Last year was disappointing.
I couldn't fit him into any of our categories, but he's somebody I would want on my watch list.
I mean, he's somebody I probably would want on the back end of my team, and you can get him for cheap. You might as well try it out.
I'm going to try to get him just because where he went to college. Somebody that I like a lot that doesn't get any press, and he's not Jewish either. He's
Christian
not Jewish.
Walker.
It's Christian Walker.
It's the old Ross joke.
It's Christian Walker.
Is not.
I mean,
Jewish.
Christian. He had some huge weeks. I mean, we talked about waiver wire. I don't know if you guys remember, but his name came up a lot during the end of the season, and he had some big weeks of which he had like 3 or 4 home runs in one week. And he does have power. And like you said, Kasey, that Arizona place is an easy place to hit.
And it's important to note, like one of the things I look for is how they did at the end of the season and whether they were able to. He batted 285 after the All-Star break. Like that's impressive. I'm sorry. 285 is a really good batting average these days. And so he ended up with a 256 or some 242 batting average. So that meant he probably batted right around 200 or 210 before the All-Star break. And then he figured it out and he ended up with 30 plus home runs, almost 100 RBIs. So yeah, I agree with you.
So that's another one. I mean, I don't think he breaks top 10, but those stats he just mentioned,
I have
not bad.
I actually had him in my top 10. I have him 10.
Didn't. I had him 11 actually, but that's fine.
I have him 10. I also have him as my value pick. He's already doing what you were hoping Rowdy Tellez would do.
Yeah.
And
where do you guys have Ty France?
Ty France, very interesting.
I have him at second base.
Who was Chevy Chase's name on Caddyshack? Was Ty, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
like
I have to agree with Kasey on that. I have him at second base especially because second base.
Even at second base, that's fine.
Talk about thin. I mean, second base is the thinnest position of all. But actually, in Yahoo, he doesn't have second base eligibility.
Oh, does he?
So
not?
I actually had him at third base.
Oh, third base. Maybe it's third base, which is even shallower, by the way. Third base, to me, has become one of the most shallow positions.
It's like a graveyard.
It used to be so deep.
I know.
I don't know. I don't know if it's because more of those third base types can play shortstop now,
or they moved to the outfield,
or they moved to the outfield.
They can't play short. They play third
base. It's a graveyard.
They moved to first base. Look, Vladimir Guerrero, the Miguel Cabrera and Albert Pujols kind of model of the late 90s was they come up as third baseman. Oops, you can hit really well, but can't field. We're going to shift you over to the other corner.
Somebody last year we talked about, we had high hopes. I mean, we all said, oh my God, I want to take this guy. We all thought he was going to have a breakout season, and he did not have a breakout season. It's Jared Walsh of the Anaheim Angels.
Well, he was great the year before.
Los Angeles Angels.
Right.
I mean,
Dan owned him. Dan owned him, and he was like a 30 homer.
But I think Ross was saying that we thought he was going to take a step forward.
Oh, we thought he was going to be an all-star last year. We all did, just not me.
Oh, sure.
So last year, bad year, not good. He did not produce like he should have. Do we draft him? Do we stay away? Do we pick him late draft? What do we do with him?
I don't have him ranked, so
I'll put him on my watch list.
Right.
So in our league, you don't think he'll be drafted?
There's a few guys I want to hear your opinions on because I have them on my list.
Good. I love this.
All right, let's wrap up on this. Go ahead.
I'll just name him. Jose Miranda of the Twins.
Of course, he's.
I have him 9.
Miguel Vargas of the Dodgers.
Is he qualifies
Vargas
first
qualifies
base?
at second, though, doesn't he?
He also qualifies at first. Yeah, I had him at first because I think they're not going to.
Vargas is the top prospect for the Dodgers, I believe. So, I mean, I have him on my list. I might draft him.
94th percentile in sprint speed, by the way.
He doesn't qualify at second base yet, but they're going to play him at second base, is what I'm hearing.
I think so too.
And then,
I mean, this guy, they have to find a spot for him, the Dodgers. This is their top prospect, and this is why they got rid of Turner, and this is why they got rid of both Turners, actually, because, they want to make room for this guy.
And then the other guy who I want on my watch list, and I want to see if you guys agree or if you draft him, is Tristan Casas in Boston.
Oh, yeah. He's a guy I'm targeting late. I think he's a guy who could emerge. And see, this debate about is first base deep or not, I think is a really interesting one, because a guy like Casas,
yeah,
he could end up being right under Pasquantino if he hits his ceiling, or maybe even eclipse it. I don't know.
Three guys, the reason I said that is the three guys I mentioned are all rookies or going into their second year, and they could make the position suddenly deeper.
And another guy we didn't even talk about who had a great year last year is Hoskins.
I was going to say we can't do first base and not talk about Rhys Hoskins.
I have him at 8.
You have him at 8? I mean, look at the line. Look at the line he had last year. I mean, he had a great year hitting, and didn't.
Yeah, he's just going to kill you in batting average too. He's a 240 hitter, and he only had.
But that's not killing you anymore. You know, like
in 30 home runs.
In batting average, that's average.
Yeah, I know.
It is average now. It's sad. Isn't it sad? That's like the average now. It's like 240.
The average is now 20 points over the Mendoza line.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
30
so
home runs is great, but only 79 RBIs out of a power hitter, out of a middle of the order guy. That's why I have him near the bottom of my top 10.
Well, you know, I have him in the bottom of the top 10, but I also think he's going to end up on none of my teams, because you have to draft him higher because he is a name value.
Right. Like I would rather get Rowdy Tellez.
Me too. I've no interest. Yeah,
3 out of 3.
I mean, again, I know you said first base is not that strong, but I just think there's a lot of guys that can have 30 home runs.
Well, how about this? First base might be the most top heavy.
Yeah.
I think it's the most top heavy, yes. And I think it has a lot of depth, but there are going to be times where you're going to be frustrated with the guy you're playing because they're not as elite as some of these other guys. I think this is a position worth drafting the big guns early.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we're going to wrap up.
You guys have Joey Votto on your top 10.
I have him banging.
What year are we talking about? Okay, guys, we just talked about the fact that third base is really shallow. So I was going to combine second base and shortstop just because middle infield, but I think we should shift it. I think next week we should do second base and third base. We'll do shortstop on its own, because shortstop has got a lot of
and they're players that are fun to talk about. So we can spend a lot of time talking about the shortstop.
We also could run over. It depends. You know, if we need to run over into the shortstop time, we can. But we're going to prepare for second base and third base next week. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Put your comments below. We want to hear your opinions about this. You know, this is part of the fun of preparing for the draft, is debating who are the value picks. Who do you think is being misranked here by us, by other people? Let's talk about it. Thanks so much for watching. We look forward to seeing you same time next week. That's Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Thank you, Kasey. Thank you, Ross. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week.